Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through the sources, pull out the key knowledge, the context you need, the stuff behind the headlines. Today, we're diving into, well, frankly, one of the most unusual stories in American business. It's about a top executive, head of a really well-known brand you probably have in your shower right now, but he uses this company, this very profitable company, not just to, donate to causes, but to build his entire corporate identity around some pretty hardcore activism.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study. We're looking at David Bronner and Dr. Bronner's magic soaps based on the materials we've gathered. And the mission, I guess, is to figure out how this works. How does the leader of a major consumer goods company basically use his corporate platform for really high stakes, unconventional, sometimes you'd even say radical activism?
Right. This isn't your typical CSR report stuff. We're talking like fundamental pushes on fair trade, sustainable farming, and really aggressive funding for things like drug policy reform. It's way beyond the usual.
Exactly. What jumps out right away is that Bronner just doesn't seem to accept that wall people usually put up between running a business and taking political action. It's not like he just bolted on a charity wing. He's woven this activism deep into the fabric of the business model itself. He's clearly a sharp business leader. Look at the growth. But these causes are baked in structurally.
And you see that blend of, let's say, business and philosophy right there in his job title. It tells you immediately this isn't your standard C-suite.
Oh, absolutely. He's not just the CEO, the chief executive officer. His actual current title, Cosmic Engagement Officer. Still CEO, but with a very different meaning.
Cosmic Engagement Officer.
Yeah. And that switch from chief executive to cosmic engagement, it suggests his job goes way beyond just the bottom line, doesn't it? It points towards this focus on bigger systemic change, on living out the company's whole philosophy, like this idea of universal well-being driving every single business choice.
Okay, so let's trace this back. To get the cosmic engagement part, we probably need to understand the roots. The company, the family. Where did David Bronner come from? He was born in LA in 1973, right? How does he end up here?
The family connection is everything. It's direct. His parents, Jim and Trudy Bronner, were central to the company. Actually, his mother, Trudy, is still the CFO.
Ah, okay.
But the, let's call it the philosophical DNA, the thing that really fuels all this activism that comes straight from his grandfather, Emanuel Bronner.
Emanuel Bronner, the guy behind the labels, right? These incredibly dense, kind of amazing labels covered in text.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Emanuel's a third-generation soap maker, a German-Jewish immigrant. He started the company back in 1948, and his main goal wasn't just selling soap, it was sharing his sort of moral and spiritual philosophy, this whole all-one idea that's literally printed all over every bottle.
All one, yeah.
That concept of universal connection, unity, everyone being linked, that's the foundation for everything David's doing now. He's essentially taking his grandfather's big ideas and translating them into, well, practical, political, and economic action.
It's interesting, too. His education wasn't exactly business-focused, was it?
No, not at all. And that's actually pretty key, I think, to understanding his later moves. He went to Harvard, graduated in '95, but his degree was in biology.
Biology, right.
And that science background, it's not just trivia. It gives him this sort of systems thinking approach you see later when he gets deep into the debates around GMOs, pesticides, regenerative farming. He understands the science.
Okay, so he wasn't groomed for the corner office in the traditional sense. He started working for the family business when 97.
Yeah, just a couple of years after graduating. But the big shift, the moment he really grabs the reins and starts steering the ship in this activist direction, that happened fast. And sadly, it was because of a family tragedy.
His father's death.
Yes. Jim Bronner died in 1998. David took over as president then. He was still pretty young. And right away, he starts this period of really intense growth working alongside his brother Michael. But here's the crucial part. That first decade, he's simultaneously pushing for massive expansion and imposing these really strict ethical rules on how they make money and how it gets shared, scaling up and locking in the values at the same time.
Let's talk about that growth, because the numbers are kind of wild. This wasn't just steady progress. It was explosive.
Oh, completely. The figures really paint the picture. When David took over in '98, the company's annual revenue was around, what, $4 million?
$4 million, yeah. Seems modest now.
Right. By 2017, they hit $120 million. That's 30-fold growth. In a market like soap and personal care, which is super competitive, full of giants like P&G, Unilever, that kind of jump is phenomenal.
And what's so interesting is that this happened while they were putting these ethical policies in place, things that, conventional business thinking would say should slow you down or hurt profits, capping salaries, pouring money into activism. you'd think that makes you less competitive.
But maybe it did the opposite. It seems like it created this really strong alignment between the brand, the actual product, and a certain kind of consumer.
The conscious consumer.
Exactly. People are increasingly wary of corporate greenwashing. Right. So Dr. Bronner comes along with this radical transparency, these structural commitments, making sure ingredients are fair trade, paying workers well. That becomes their edge. Consumers feel like they're actively choosing to buy something where their money directly fuels change they believe in. It flips the script.
Okay, let's get specific on that structure. The cornerstone seems to be this voluntary salary cap. That's the mechanism that really enforces the fair labor idea right at the very top.
And it's genuinely revolutionary compared to standard U.S. corporate practice. Since 1999, they've had this strict internal rule. The highest paid executive, including David Bronner himself, can't make more than 5 times the total compensation of the lowest paid full-time worker in the company.
5 times. Just sit with that number for a second. Because you look at the average big company, a Fortune 500 firm. The CEO to worker pay ratio is often, 300 to 1, sometimes way more?
Easily. So 5 to 1 is just, it's off the charts in the other direction.
So how does that actually function? What does it signal?
Well, first, it's a very loud signal about economic justice, right? It ensures that as the company does better, the benefits flow down. They don't just pool at the top. It prevents that massive consolidation of wealth. And second, this is absolutely crucial, they can do this because Dr. Bronner's is a private family-owned company.
Right. That private ownership is the key enabler here, isn't it?
Totally. If they were public, listed on the stock market, forget it. Shareholders would be screaming for them to maximize profits, which usually means squeezing wages and paying executives whatever the market rate is, which would be vastly higher. Being private lets them shield themselves from that constant short-term pressure. It allows them to embed these long-term ethical goals right into the core structure.
Okay, but I have to push back a bit here. Does that cap create a vulnerability? Couldn't a competitor just swoop in and offer, say, their chief operating officer or even Trudy, the CFO, 10 or 20 times what they're making under the cap? Doesn't it risk losing top talent?
That's a really fair question, and it's something they must have thought about. I think they countered that risk in a few ways. First, that very same cap probably builds incredible loyalty and keeps turnover low among the rest of the staff. That saves money on recruitment, training.
Good point.
People likely choose to work there partly because of the mission, not just the paycheck. So you attract talent that's maybe less motivated purely by maximizing their own salary and more by the values. That shared belief itself becomes a kind of glue, a retention tool.
So the culture bred by the cap actually helps retain the right kind of people.
Possibly, yeah. And maybe that stability and morale boost across the board makes up for potentially losing an executive who's purely chasing the highest dollar amount. The ethical structure itself becomes part of the compensation package, in a way.
It flips the incentive structure.
Yeah, it's this active way of building equity and maybe long-term stability. It kind of proves that radical fairness doesn't have to tank the business. It might even strengthen it.
And then in 2015, David Bronner makes this official shift, handing over the day-to-day reins.
Correct. He stepped out of the traditional president role and took on that title we mentioned, Cosmic Engagement Officer, the CEO. This basically freed him up to focus almost entirely on the mission stuff. The activism, the policy work, making sure the supply chains were ethical. His brother, Michael Bronner, stepped up as president to handle the operational side, keep the engine running.
Which leads us neatly into this newer project, Brother David's. This seems like the purest expression yet of business-funded activism, founded in 2019.
Exactly. Brother David's is a separate company, specifically set up to produce organic, sun-grown cannabis.
Cannabis, okay.
This is where his long-held passions collide perfectly. Sustainable farming meets drug policy reform, all wrapped up in a commercial product, and the details matter. They partner with Flocana, a supply chain company, and work with independent small farmers. They're trying to build the ethical standards right in from the start.
But the kicker, the really ingenious part, is what they do with the money. This isn't just donating some profits.
No, this is the ethical loop concept. They've publicly committed that 100% all profits from Brother David's go directly back into supporting 2 specific things: regenerative agriculture initiatives and the fight to reform drug prohibition laws.
Wow.
So think about it. They're literally using the sales of a product that's still legally tricky in many places to fund the movement aimed at changing those very laws and funding the kind of sustainable farming they want to see replace industrial act.
It's a self-funding engine for political change. Use the market to reshape the market's rules.
Precisely. It's pretty radical.
Okay, let's pivot from the business structure to the actual activism on the ground. You mentioned the financial scale of this commitment.
Yeah, this is what fuels everything else. The company dedicates roughly 10% of its total annual revenue, not profit revenue, to charitable giving and activist causes.
10% of revenue. So back in 2017, when they were doing $120 million, it's like $12 million a year, specifically earmarked for changing policy and supporting nonprofits. That's serious money.
It really is. It puts them in the league as some pretty major foundations. It shows that Bronner sees the company as, well, fundamentally as a tool for moving money towards the causes he champions, using consumer spending to drive systemic change.
And one of the most famous examples of this in action was the hemp wars. This was a real showdown, corporate lawsuits, plus personal civil disobedience. Bronner directly took on the federal government.
This went down early on, between 2001 and 2004. David really led the charge here. The company bankrolled and helped coordinate a major lawsuit working with the Hemp Industry Association aimed squarely at the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA.
And the DEA was trying to basically outlaw hemp, even the non-drug kind.
Pretty much. They wanted to lump industrial hemp, which has virtually no THC, you can't get high from it, and it was crucial for Dr. Bronner's soaps and other products under the same rules as marijuana, making it a Schedule A controlled substance. The lawsuit's goal was to stop that.
What was the core argument? How did they fight it legally?
The main point was that the DEA was overstepping its authority. They argued that the Controlled Substances Act didn't give the DEA power to regulate non-psychoactive parts of the cannabis plant, like hemp seeds and oil, especially stuff that had been legally imported and used for ages. It was about distinguishing the chemistry in the plant parts.
And they won.
Big time. It was a huge victory for the whole hemp industry. The Ninth Circuit Court first put a hold on the DEA's rule in 2002, and then in 2004, they ruled decisively in favor of the hemp folks. That decision basically saved the U.S. market for hemp foods and products, which was obviously vital for Dr. Bronner's.
But winning in court wasn't enough for Bronner, was it? He then took it to the streets, basically, using political theater.
Absolutely. He started using civil disobedience as like a form of corporate communication. Really dramatic stuff. In 2009, he got himself arrested for a very symbolic act. He went to DEA headquarters and started planting hemp seeds right there on their front lawn.
On the DEA's lawn.
Yeah, it was pure defiance, right?
Oh.
A visual way of saying, this plant is harmless and legal. Why are you treating it like a major drug? Highly visible.
And then there was the cage incident. That's probably the most iconic image of his activism.
2012 cage protest, yeah. That's pure messaging brilliance, really. He got himself locked inside a metal cage right across the street from the White House.
Wow.
And while he was locked in there, he started actually harvesting hemp stalks and processing them,
Right.
milling hemp oil. Live demonstration. Of course, he got arrested again.
Right.
But the image, a CEO in a cage making hemp oil opposite the White House, unforgettable.
What was the specific point of the cage, though? Is it just a stunt for media attention, or was there a deeper message? Is that really effective?
I think it's effective because it grabs attention in a way a legal brief never could. The cage was a metaphor, right? It visualized the idea that the government was keeping this useful, non-psychoactive plant, and the businesses trying to use it effectively caged up by outdated laws. It made the absurdity of hemp prohibition instantly understandable to anyone watching the news. It cut through the complexity. So yeah, theatrical, but strategically so.
That kind of personal risk, putting himself out there to be arrested, it's certainly not typical CEO behavior, and it got him noticed, like that Cannabis Activist of the Year award in 2015.
For sure. And his policy work goes way beyond just hemp and cannabis. He's become a major force in the psychedelics policy reform movement too, particularly focusing on the therapeutic potential.
How's he deploying the company's resources there? What's the strategy?
Well, for one, he's on the board of directors for MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Study.
MAPS, right. They do a lot of the clinical research, especially with MDMA for PTSD.
Exactly. They're a serious nonprofit pushing the research and trying to create the frameworks for legal therapeutic use. Being on the board gives him influence there.
And then there's the direct funding for political campaigns.
Yes. Changing laws costs money, especially ballot initiatives. So in 2019, Dr. Bronner's put up a big chunk of change, a $150,000 matching contribution to back Oregon's statewide ballot initiative.
That was the one to legalize psilocybin-assisted therapy.
That's the one. By funding that directly, they're actively trying to shape policy, state by state, to get these therapies legalized and regulated.
So again, you see that total integration, using the soap profits to try and mainstream these substances and therapies that fit their sort of countercultural all-one view,
Yeah,
grabbing policy change from the supermarket aisle, essentially.
it really is. Corporate mission and political goals just merged. They're not waiting for the laws to change, they're paying to change the laws.
Okay, let's broaden it out a bit. Beyond hemp and psychedelics, his activism also hits hard on organic standards, sustainable farming, especially the whole GMO debate. This seems to connect back to that biology degree.
Definitely. His engagement here really highlights concerns about, environmental impact and consumer transparency. Back in 2014, he wrote this really punchy advertorial, an ad written like an opinion piece.
Right.
And its whole point was to flag something that seemed counterintuitive, that the rise of GMO crops in the U.S. hadn't decreased pesticide use as promised, but had actually led to a big increase.
That was a direct challenge to the big biotech narrative, wasn't it?
Absolutely. He laid out the argument. Crops engineered to resist herbicides, like Roundup-ready crops, just led to farmers spraying way more glyphosate. This created herbicide-resistant superweeds, which then required even stronger, nastier chemical cocktails. His big push was for mandatory GMO labeling, so people could actually choose what they were buying based on these impacts.
And how did they get this message out? The publishing strategy was pretty ambitious.
Yeah, they used their financial muscle. It ran first in places like the Huffington Post, but then they bought huge, full-page ad placements in really prestigious magazines. The New Yorker, Scientific American.
Targeting a specific audience there.
Clearly, they wanted to reach an educated readership, spark a more informed public discussion beyond just the industry talking points.
But the really telling part of this story, the part that reveals a lot about media influence, was that some major scientific journals refused to run the ad.
This is fascinating, yeah. Two of the absolute top-tier global science journals, Science and Nature, said no. They wouldn't take the paid advertisement.
Wait, they refused a paid ad from a legitimate multi-million-dollar company. What was the reason given, according to the sources?
The reason cited, at least in one instance, was fear of backlash from the GMO industry.
Backlash. Wow.
Think about that. These journals rely heavily on advertising, not just from universities, but from the big players in biotech, pharma, the very industry Bronner was criticizing. The implication is they worried that running this ad, even a paid one, might tick off their bigger advertisers and jeopardize those relationships.
That raises some pretty serious questions about scientific communication, doesn't it? If journals like Science and Nature are turning down content, not because it's factually wrong, but because they're scared of industry pressure, what does that say about open debate on crucial topics like our food system?
It strongly suggests that financial interests can create a kind of gatekeeping, even in supposedly neutral scientific forums. It potentially chills debate on uncomfortable topics. And Bronner, maybe intentionally or not, highlighted this perfectly because the refusal itself became part of the story, drawing even more attention to the power dynamics he was questioning.
Beyond these big policy fights, the company's philanthropy also reflects this action-oriented approach, right? Like their support for animal rights groups.
Yeah, and again, it aligns with the all-one idea, extending compassion to animals. They've been significant backers of groups like the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society.
Sea Shepherd, they're the ones known for pretty direct interventions at sea, right? Confronting whaling ships and illegal fishing operations.
Exactly. Not just lobbying or awareness campaigns, but physically getting in the way to protect marine life. So again, Dr. Bronner's funding tends to flow towards groups that are out there on the front lines, taking direct action, embodying that same spirit Bronner shows in his own protests.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to something more personal, but still deeply connected to that all-one ethos. David Bronner's recent public statements about his own gender identity.
Right, this was a really notable moment, especially for a prominent business leader. In 2022, on National Coming Out Day, he published this very personal essay on the company website.
What did he share?
He announced that he uses both he, him, and they, them pronouns, which signals, a non-binary, gender-fluid identity.
That's still incredibly rare for someone in his position, running such a visible consumer brand. How did he describe it?
He used really interesting personal language. He described himself as being about 25% girl and explicitly said he doesn't identify neatly as straight, gay, or man or woman. It felt like a very deliberate move away from fixed categories, embracing fluidity and complexity.
And he rooted this personal journey in his family context, didn't he? It wasn't just out of the blue.
Yeah, and that part felt really authentic. He mentioned how his family environment helped him explore this. His wife, Mia, identifies as bisexual and gender fluid, and they have a child, Maya, who's 25 and non-binary. So it sounds like this personal openness grew out of a family that already understood and embraced identities beyond the traditional binaries.
So if we tie this back to the company philosophy, how does this very public personal vulnerability connect with All One? Does it strengthen the brand message?
I think it creates this powerful synergy. All One is fundamentally about breaking down barriers, recognizing our interconnectedness, accepting difference. By publicly embracing he/they pronouns, by defining his identity in this fluid way, Bronner is basically modeling that principle from the very top. It says that radical acceptance isn't just an external policy for fair trade or drug laws. It applies to the core of who we are. The company's activism has always been about bringing things into the fold: small farmers, marginalized plants. Now he's showing that inclusion extends to gender identity, too. It adds this layer of personal authenticity and vulnerability to the corporate leadership.
It makes the cosmic engagement title feel even more fitting somehow. Okay, so wrapping this up, it's been a deep dive into a really unique figure. We've tracked David Bronner from, Harvard biology to cosmic engagement officer. We've seen this incredible business growth, $4 million to $120 million.
While simultaneously locking in that radical 5-to-1 salary cap.
Right. And then the activism, not just writing checks, but the lawsuits against the DEA, the civil disobedience planting hemp, the White House cage.
And the targeted funding pushing for hemp legalization, backing psilocybin therapy in Oregon. His story really demonstrates that you can fuse deep ethical commitments and pretty radical politics with serious commercial success. They seem to feed each other in his case.
Yeah, the activism and the corporate identity aren't just parallel tracks. They seem completely intertwined. Like the business itself is structured as an activist engine.
A self-funding political movement, almost. Using soap sales to reshape laws and agricultural practices. That commitment to actually changing the rules, not just working within them, is what makes the approach so potent.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on. Given everything we've seen, Bronner's absolute dedication to transparency, ethics, and these sometimes controversial causes, is there a limit? How much political and social activism can a brand really weave into its identity before the message starts to overshadow the product itself, maybe even alienate mainstream consumers?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The saturation point. He's built a brand where, for many people, the message is the product. But how far can you push that? Can the ideological weight become too heavy for someone who just, wants to buy some soap?
Something to think about next time you're reading one of those incredibly packed labels.